we're an empire on stolen land with internal forms of colonization and external forms of colonization.
Taking center stage today is Amin Husain, activist, writer, artist, attorney, and until early 2024, a professor. The Palestinian American made headlines when New York University suspended him. Husain is also the co-founder of a movement fighting colonialism. Amin says he's the latest example of academic repression on campuses aimed at stifling Palestinian perspectives. Amin Husain, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Your classes at New York University were quite popular, from what I understand. You taught liberation and resistance movements. Yet, I also read that Jewish students didn't feel welcome. And, in fact, that the New York Post editorial board urged New York University to fire you for, quote, propagating hate and violence against Jews. In a statement, New York University, after your suspension, said, all members of our community must adhere to the university's discrimination and anti-harassment policies. Why were you suspended?
For a long time, I didn't know. I found out from my students the day I was supposed to teach 2 classes, Art, Activism, and Beyond, and Justice Lab. And they wouldn't tell me for months. And I went through a fact-finding mission with the Office of Equal Opportunity and so forth. And in the end, they said there were about 2 or 3 statements that I made off campus when I wasn't teaching to students about October 7th and the Palestinian liberation struggle and what was going on, the war on Gaza. And
what statements did they cite?
They cited that I said, quote and unquote, New York City is a Zionist city. I said that. But I also teach anti-colonial struggle. And Zionism is a colonial ideology. And so I was speaking from a place in which I've published, I've spoken about this. These are political positions and analysis. And I was presenting that to the students who were thinking and people that were outside of campus.
So you were suspended indefinitely, which you've said is essentially termination, from NYU for statements you made off campus.
In a teach-in.
So your supporters have said that this is the latest example of academic repression aimed at stifling Palestinian American perspectives on campus. What I would ask first is that accurate in this particular situation? Because Jewish students said that they didn't feel welcome in your classrooms at NYU.
It's not true at all, because I've taught at NYU for 7 or 8 years. My classes are always oversubscribed. I teach in different departments. I've had Jewish students in my classes, almost every class. Never once was there a complaint about me to the administration. Never once did I get a warning. And when I got my essentially firing, it's suspension, but it's essentially firing, no one even talked to me about it. It was just an email from Human Resources.
Do you think your academic career is over?
I think my academic career is over in terms of these institutions that try to take a political line about the world and what's possible and what's not for kids, for students, for the younger age.
Do you think there's a space for the Palestinian perspective in American academia today?
They're trying to make it so that there isn't a place for that. But the students and the faculty and the workers and the cause itself is much larger and more resilient than that.
Well, 2024 has seen, in my opinion, the largest protest movement supporting the Palestinians in American history. And yet there's also been a rise in anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. And now universities have implemented policies that are making it more difficult for students on campus to protest. First off, why do you think this issue, the war in Gaza, has resonated so much with students?
It resonated so much because you have to think about the kind of nation state that we're living in, that we're speaking from, that I'm a citizen of also. It's a settler colonial project. It identifies with Israel. It identifies with that project as well. So when you think about the war, they're thinking about how it's also a danger to the situation over here. Think about Occupy Wall Street, 2011. about economic inequality. Has that changed? No. The war in Gaza in 2014, coupled with Black Lives Matter and Ferguson, the uprising, it was about racial inequality. Did that change? No. Me Too movement around gender, no DAPL, right, which is the indigenous sovereignty struggle. All these struggles were struggles to correct the project of America. And all these people, all they got back, that fought these struggles, generations now, trying to correct this project. And we've reached a point where there was no recourse for it after the pandemic. When we talk about Palestine, we're talking about a compass for liberation for all of us. And I, as a Palestinian here, can't talk about liberation over there without talking about it over here and the debts that I owe. The indigenous people that were wiped off this land, the enslaved people that were brought here to build it, the migrants that we wage war over there so they can come and build over here while we demonize, criminalize, and send them back and actually run an election on that basis.
Do you think the movement on campus has fizzled as a result of the stricter policies? The new semester, fall semester began, and we haven't seen these kinds of encampments and tense protests.
Movements keep moving. An act that's radical today isn't radical tomorrow. I think students right now are understanding that their movement wasn't just a student movement. Restricting it to the boundaries of the university or campus limit its leverage in terms of fighting back, in terms of solidarity, in terms of changing the institution. So in speaking with students right now, I'm hearing a lot of thinking about what is the next step? How do we connect to communities? Because think about it, when the administrations tried to destroy these movements, what did they do? They said only students are allowed in the encampments. Who's just a student? Who's just the faculty? Look at Columbia. It's one of the largest landowners in New York City. It started on Wall Street, chartered before it was moved, bequeathed on land from the Queen of England. We can't talk about these things without recognizing that they're trying to actually maintain power. So then ultimately this is about power. It's a call for all of us, not to be just in solidarity with Palestine, but how the liberation of Gaza and the liberation of the Palestinians is a precondition to the liberation of all of us. And conversely, I'd say, as a Palestinian, my struggle doesn't end until the Lebanese people are also free, until all of us are free.
So this dovetails into something that you're very passionate about, which is a movement that you launched. And I want to read something. The university, the museum, and the city are sites of struggle and organizing. I know you recognize it because it's from the website of the movement you founded called Decolonize This Place. Why did you co-found Decolonize This Place, and what are you hoping to accomplish?
So me and several other really important people work together to learn from previous failures about our movements. In other words, our movements tend to be issue silos. Occupy Wall Street wasn't really about economic inequality, it's about a different way of living in the United States. All these different movements took on different causes and different struggles. It turns out that we needed to have an analysis about this place that begins with that we're an empire on stolen land, with internal forms of colonization and external forms of colonization. Internal forms of colonization is when they make people poor so they can join the army. They keep you in debt so you work for the places you hate.
And what's an example of external colonialism, which is
all these wars that are being fought elsewhere that lead to forced migration, that lead to climate crisis, that lead to more profit and extraction, and this profit and wealth and extraction being in the hands of fewer and fewer people.
So based on the analysis that Decolonize This Place did, if you will, this kind of post-mortem on previous movements, why did they fail? And what can you learn from this current movement going forward?
The thing to learn is that if we're fighting a genocide, we can't then in the end want to assimilate into that project. We're all part of a different project, a project in which we're creating worlds, we live in worlds in which we want this world to accept. I want to be able to say I'm a Palestinian, to wear a hatta, to not get fired from a university in which I'm a good teacher and students like me, This power dynamic, it turns out that it's not going to be changed by elections. That would have happened when people elected Obama. At the end of the day, the analysis of liberation is to go back to the 40s, 50s, and 60s. That's what Palestine points to, because Palestine is not yet in existence. So what does it mean for a nation state to come into existence? Well, the 40s, 50s, and 60s, think about these places. Lebanon, think about Palestine. They were fighting anti-colonial struggles to get free, not for a nation state. They made those synonymous. When we join a nation state, we join under European rules. European profit, European orientation. It goes back to Westphalian civilization. Our Decolonize This Place said, act where you are, recognize the debts that we owe each other. The issue silos are connected, we engage with them strategically. And this isn't about a protest or a march or a direct action. This is about creating community that's able to survive and able to defend and able to create networks in which this nation state project that goes back to 1492 in its modern form is really meant to incarcerate us.
So one tactic Decolonize This Place has taken is to, I think it's safe to say, be a thorn in the side of New York City-based museums. Protests you've organized have resulted in the resignation of a vice chair at the Whitney Museum of American Art in 2019. That vice chair was tied to a company that produced weapons and tear gas. In 2016, protests by Decolonize This Place led to the removal of 2 Native American statues in the front of the building. Why target museums, and why take an approach that even critics who believe in your philosophy criticize because profanity is being used, because they deem it too aggressive?
This isn't a protest. This is an entire way of thinking. We produced knowledge, we did research, we were in communities. There's a reason why people show up in the hundreds. And this statue, for example, in front of the American Museum of Natural History, had Theodore Roosevelt on a horse, flanked by two figures, meant to be an indigenous figure, a Native American chief, and an enslaved person, walking barefoot, one almost naked, facing east. That monument is a monument to white supremacy. The way we're raised not to even recognize it is because everyone has to go on Columbus Day to the American Museum of Natural History, sit by that monument and marvel at it. First of all, what's important about a museum is that it's a soft target as well. It's a soft engagement because it deals with the police. In order for the police now to deal with us, they have to get an okay from the museum. That ability to create a buffer between the police and the place of engagement was important to teach people that that's possible. But more importantly, look who's on the board of these museums. These institutions are an extension of the state. They have a lot of power, soft power. The soft power is to educate people to think in a particular way. Engaging in those sites creates a different pedagogy and lets people know that they have power to say and do otherwise.
But did you ever feel you're at cross purposes? Because museums have been under a lot of pressure in recent years to be more representative, to display artists that were marginalized, especially people of color. Is there a balance here?
The connection with museums, the way they're being used right now, they're art washing. They're art washing a genocide. I've been offered to do a show as a Palestinian. What show can I do?
You are facing enormous, right, headwinds to affect any kind of change as a movement, right? You're talking about enormous amounts of money and power.
So the thing about money and power, money is relationality. And there's power above and power below and power with and power within. When we're talking about that type of power, we're talking about power from above. It's the oppression, it's the domination. We're trying to break that power. You break that power by creating other forms of power. When we come together, it's not a protest, it's a manifestation of power. In a space in which knowledge is shared, people touch, and that power allows them to continue. That way of thinking allows them to know they're not alone. One of the biggest impacts is the alienation and individualism. If you look at the modern condition that we're living in, we're alienated, alone, afraid.
And we feel unempowered.
And feel disempowered.
So you feel that movements like Decolonize This Place is empowering people.
People empower themselves. We consider ourselves more a decolonial formation that extends, right? But what it does is that it opens the space for something otherwise to manifest. We could do the same analysis around the Palestinian liberation struggle. Any liberation struggle of people against powers of domination, and in the story of this country, right? They're ruthless. But giving up a way of living and succumbing to that, honestly, like for me as a person who lived in Palestine and lived here half, is not living. I know this from my students. Most of my classes, they come in and they're done with classes like we've been lied to.
What's next for you as a writer, as an artist, and do you think you'll return to teaching if given an opportunity?
I think I would. It's always been about, can I be in a space to meet others on our terms? It's not supposed to be this way. This whole reality could be a million other ways. The amount of force they're using on Gaza and Lebanon is to make sure that people won't even think that way. And this is where power, force, alters the structures of the imagination, of what you're able to imagine. And so we both love each other, but we're trying to say, I really love you, I don't want you to die. And you're saying, I love you too, but I need to live this way, otherwise I don't know what love is. These two worldviews are not allowed to coexist right now, only one.
Amin Husain, thank you.